Okay, I just wanted to introduce here spread footing for piers, kind of a shotgun style house. This is the framework. Here are the spread footings, and here are the piers that sit on top of the spread footing. This is kind of the next generation, if you will, of pier and beam housing. Back in the old days, you had an isolated spread footing with a single pier, right? We can go to any of the old houses downtown and so forth, and really across the country. That's how it was done. Now things have changed, and you're getting more into a contiguous spread footing arrangement that helps lock the piers in to help manage and mitigate the differential settlement that can happen. All right. In the historical ways where you had individual spread footings, each one of those piers could move at the rate and direction that was influencing them. And that could be from loads from above, or soil saturation, or water going under the house, multiple things. But this circumstance, I just simply wanted to show you that we've got a spread footing arrangement, a porch here on the front, kind of a shotgun style house. And here's a simple framing up on the top, right? This detail is really about the same thing, other than what we're doing is showing a slab where the slab is on the ground and the piers are going to be on top. See the piers here, here, and then we have a slab reinforcement detail here. So it's basically, it looks like a house slab with piers on top of it. And of course the framing plan here. I wanted to just kind of introduce, and I think we're all pretty familiar with these, but I wanted to introduce some common raised foundations. I took details from our inventory at our office just to kind of introduce. It's in your handout. I'm going to kind of go through these fairly quickly. If you have questions, certainly ask. You have the details here. These are generic details. They're not to be used on any particular property or what have you. But this is a typical exterior CMU pier. We have a spread footing down below. Think of the two slides back. We've got a spread footing, your pier, your reinforcement, and then your engagement system for your framing here. Notice that the sheathing comes all the way down and blocks all the way in here. Notice how we're starting to lock those assemblies together. This is an interior pier. Again, a CMU display here. This detail happens to show the intermediate beam being a multiply system as opposed to a bearing system where you have a beam and your joist sits on top. You follow me? This assembly is one where we have multiply and the joists all come within the same frame. Same horizontal frame system. This is very similar to the previous one we showed. It represents one with a grade change. And notice that this is the slab assembly here. And that this rebar system comes all the way through the block. I'll say it now, we'll talk about it again later. Please, please, please fill the CMU block all the way with concrete. We see a lot of voids that create some problems. We'll show you pictures after a while. But when those loads come back in, remember the overturning moment that we talked about up front? If this pier assembly is on the edge of your building and the wind and those loads get transmitted through the building and press upon this pier, and it wants to rock the pier or axial load the pier, too much weight into the pier, it can fracture these corners if we don't have the concrete completely filled. We want to make it a homogeneous assembly as we can. If you have voids in the concrete here, then it gives the pier that much more ability to kind of wobble. Follow what I'm saying? Here's a pier and beam assembly at the front porch. Again, what we feel is fairly typical. These spread footings, while they look unique in a plan view, they would all be locked together. Kind of help that whole frame assembly stay tight. This is a column set up where it's engaged into the foundation here. This assembly, it really, the reinforcement goes all the way up, and you will have a locking bolting mechanism in place. Again, think in terms of that overturning. Very similar to the previous. Now here's pile left long. Now what I'm thinking about is Grand Isle or any of your low-lying areas where the piles are sticking up out of the ground. Gordon and I are called out to investigate, and often these piles left long, that's the terminology we use. Do you guys have any other term? They're sticking out of the ground, and many times there's no cross bracing between them. Why? Well, that's where the boat goes. That's where the truck goes. That's how it happens. And a strong point to argue, but I'm here to tell you that my brother has a camp over in between Slidell and New Orleans, and when he was buying it, that was the first thing I said, is you've got to lock this thing together because it moves and twists. And even in a high wind event, you can actually feel the building moving, all right? That has everything to do with locking these pile systems in place, all right? But commonly, the piles are driven, and then the frame assembly is installed, and then we start bringing the superstructure up on top. This particular detail, we're showing beams that are inlaid into the piles, and we'll strap it in at this point here. We're also going to show you some cross bracing in a few slides. Here's an assembly where there's brick veneer in front of the pile. People want to make them nice and attractive, and I get that, but just know that that pile has a tendency to want to move. And if you tie masonry products to that, then they will move as well. So you want to really lock this up. In this particular detail, we put a pile cap in place. So the brick can sit there and you can dress it up on the outside. And I would suggest not to minimize this pile cap. Now, if these piles are inlaid into a slab, right? People want to pour slabs. That really helps lock those piles together. It adds quite a bit. Question? Question? No? Many times you'll see a slab installed in between the piles underneath, so you can park your truck or your boat or what have you. Sometimes people leave it with loose gravel. If you have a slab system that's properly installed, that sheds water from underneath from wind-driven rain, and it's sufficiently deep enough, it will lock these piles and really provide a lot of strength. So if you, in a design situation, a construction situation with a client, might want to give that some thought if they want, and you can share that with them. It's a strong attribute for this type of arrangement. This is concrete column. This is fairly common where we have a drop beam and then we have the platform sitting on top, as opposed to the horizontal framing system here. And these beams will vary. This depiction is rather small compared to what we see, especially in high wind events. But it's very important to lock these beams here into the frame assembly above and the piers here. If those are loose or inadequate, we'll show you some examples of what can happen. But that connection is pretty critical, especially in a high wind area. I would start saying South Ascension Parish, and then further south from there. That's when the wind speeds start picking up. Questions? This is a typical interior column. It shows the beam going all the way across. We're showing the straps and tying the strap into the beam. The beam is tied into the column. You see it here? Very important in today's world. And code compliance. So here's the cross bracing. We're showing here a depiction of cables, right? Just cross cables. Many people use 2x material, treated 2x12 or so forth. This circumstance is really, really important in keeping the lateral movement at minimum. Extremely important and often overlooked. Especially, I'm thinking of these coastal areas, we've all driven them. But really in areas in Baton Rouge, near our bayous and rivers and what have you, when we start getting into these raised systems, we have to make sure that we manage the lateral movement in the building. And this is one way to do it. Again, if you have, say, 2x12, 2x10, 2x8, whatever it may be, cross material, they're usually on each side of the pile. Okay, so let's say front face, back face, back face. You follow me? 2 bolts required at each one of those connections, not one. If you put one, the whole thing can pivot. You put 2 bolts here, you lock this member coming in here. You understand what I'm saying? And you can also catch it on the back side and bolt it together, lock it up tightly. And then you'll probably need a spacer in between here with your 2x material, the width of your pile. Follow what I'm saying? Questions? So this is a plan view of the cross bracing pattern. We pulled this from one of our plans that we did. You can see, it doesn't have to be every bay, folks. You see what this represents here? It doesn't have to be every bay that you can't use the area beneath the building. The piles are left long, they're high, but these cross bracing features here and here are managing those loads that are coming this way. We're locking the system together to help push back. Can you see that? Envision it? And the same here and here, and the other 2 here and here. That's giving us, we're locking the floor system in, and it's giving us the ability to push back against the wind and minimize the swaying that goes on in the building. One thing we didn't talk about earlier, when the piles are driven, you should get test reports on their resistance. The design is going to call for the pile to be driven either to a particular depth or to a particular resistance. And those features need to be adhered to, not just some pile driving guys saying, well, we drive all these piles to 35 feet or 20 feet or whatever the case is. All right? That matters. And it really depends on the type of soil that you have. Okay?